Your Excellencies, good morning, bon dia. It is a real privilege and a profound responsibility to get this opportunity to address this pivotal EurAfrican Forum 2025. Going by some of the opening remarks, I do understand and appreciate the impact that this gathering has on the potential for both our continents. Europe and Africa are united by a shared history that requires us to form transformative relationships that drive prosperity for our people. And that is exactly what I see this gathering allowing us to do, giving us the opportunity for honest conversations about that shared past, but the vision and the courage for the future that we must build together. Ours is a relationship forged through centuries, through trade, through exchange, through migration, and through conflict. The earliest trade connections between the continents go back to antiquity, when African gold, ivory, and textiles enriched Mediterranean markets and European goods found their way into the heart of the African continent. These were relationships of exchange and mutual curiosity. But with time came imbalance. The colonial period marked a profound rupture, a chapter in which the principles of partnership were replaced with control, exploitation, and extraction. Europe's industrial rise was built in no small part on the back of African human and natural resources. It is an uncomfortable past, but for us to be able to look strongly at the future, it's important to understand where we're coming from. African boundaries were drawn without regard to peoples. Our economies were oriented primarily to serve Europe's needs. Let us be clear. Colonialization constrained Africa's capacity to develop on its own terms. It disrupted indigenous governance, fragmented economic systems, and created dependencies that many African countries are still working to overcome. But history is not destiny. And today, we are presented with a different opportunity. Today, we are bound by far more than that history. We are connected through a dense web of trade, investment, security partnerships, and cultural ties. And as we heard our previous speakers say, Portuguese, as an example, is seen as an African language. And more importantly, religion. As Anita said, we like to pray, as we learned from our partners from Europe. Permit me to focus for a minute on the changing dynamics of our trade relationship. Over the past 20 years, trade flows between Africa and Europe have evolved significantly. In 2004, total trade between the two continents was just under $200 billion US. By 2024, that figure had risen to over $480 billion, at a cumulative annual growth rate of about 5%. But that 5% masks a certain shift that I think we all need to recognize. From 2004 to 2014, the growth during that period was 9% per annum. But if we then come to the more recent decade, it has been a paltry 0.8% per annum growth. And it tells you there's a tectonic shift that we as partners must be aware of and must consciously work together to address that change. But in all this change, Africa still continues to export primarily raw materials to Europe, minerals, fossil fuels, and agricultural products, whilst importing machinery, chemicals, and manufactured goods. This asymmetry highlights the urgent need for Africa to move up the value chain and for Europe to support that transformation. Recent efforts, such as the EU's Global Gateway and the African Continental Free Trade Area, offer new momentum for diversified value-added trade. Sectors like renewable energy, agribusiness, pharmaceuticals, and digital service are opening up new frontiers of cooperation. Trade between our two continents must be seen not merely as transactional, but as a strategic alliance, one grounded in fairness, shared prosperity, and a commitment to enduring partnerships between our people. Imagine the possibilities that Africa offers in that dynamic. A continent of 1.5 billion people with a median age under 20 years, empowered to innovate, to produce, and to trade, not just raw materials, but finished goods. African cities becoming engines of green infrastructure and technology aligned with global climate adaptation goals. Vibrant regional markets that open new avenues for European investment, not just in extractives, but in education, health, energy, and digital infrastructure. This is not a zero-sum game. When Africa grows, Europe gains. When Africa stabilizes, Europe strengthens. When Africa thrives, the global system becomes more balanced and resilient. So what does this transformation require? First, Europe must support African agency, not prescribe African agendas. The African Union's Agenda 2063, on which this forum is founded, provides a clear and ambitious blueprint. Our support should align with these priorities. Second, access to fair and equitable finance must be reformed, with strong African financial institutions as a foundation. Africa needs long-term capital to build infrastructure, drive industrialization, and to adapt to climate change. Europe can be a vital partner in this journey, especially through foreign direct investment and modern tools that unlock new markets and allow us to build sustainable value chains. But Africa must move towards a future of self-reliance. Building strong financial institutions that can partner European institutions to drive this transformation. Our regional and continental multilateral financial institutions, including Afrexim Bank, must be adequately resourced and protected as the bedrock of that future. Afrexim Bank's recent modest interventions give us a glimpse of what is possible. At the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, with none of the major vaccine manufacturers willing to even discuss with African countries, Afrexim Bank provided an innovative $2 billion advanced procurement commitment guarantee to Johnson & Johnson on behalf of African Union member states as well as the CARICOM countries through the Africa Vaccine Acquisition Trust Vehicle, which made it possible for the continent to secure access to 400 million doses of J&J COVID-19 vaccines. The arrangement, which was based on a first-of-its-kind pooled procurement mechanism, made it possible for all countries, large and small, to secure these critical vaccines at the same price, irrespective of how much you were willing to procure. In addition, during this critical period, Afrexim Bank put in place what we call a pandemic trade impact mitigation facility, under which we disbursed over $8 billion between 2020 and 2021 to assist our member countries to adjust in an orderly manner to the financial, economic, and health shocks that the pandemic brought on us. Let me also point you to an example of what we've done as African financial institutions. The Dangote refinery and petrochemical plant, which recently became operational, incorporating the largest single-train refinery in the world and one of the largest nitrogen fertilizer and petrochemical plants globally. Afrexim Bank is the largest financier in that project, providing $2.5 billion both directly and indirectly. But just as important is that much of the financing balance came from local banks that are owned and controlled by Africans. Afrexim Bank has supported the confirmation of over $30 billion in documentary credits and facilitated over $100 billion in trade payments since 2020. I'm giving the example with Afrexim Bank where I work, but I am sure that if any of my colleagues from the other regional multilateral banks were here, they would have similar examples to tell us what we are doing together. Permit me to also highlight the fact that our support and intervention is not just limited to African countries. We support whoever is willing to come on the continent to help us drive this transformation. As an example, there's a large Portuguese EPC contractor who we have partnered to deliver multi-billion-dollar projects across the continent. And this is exactly what we must aspire more of, to have African financial institutions funding critical projects on the continent and bridging the trade finance gap. It is also important for us to acknowledge the strong part that European institutions, including the European Investment Bank, Agence Française de Développement, and KfW, have played to enable us to undertake these transformative initiatives. Third, African capital and investment must also have access to European markets. We cannot wait until we have completely transformed our continent before we start diversifying our interest into the global space. If it is not pragmatic for African firms to extend our participation in our commodity value chains on the African continent, we must look to do so in the markets where that is possible, so our people benefit more from the wealth derived from our vast commodity resources. Just think about it. Isn't it time that Ghanaian and Ivorian firms are investing in chocolate and cocoa manufacturing facilities in Europe? Think about it. That is one of the ways in which we believe we can extend our impact and to be able to really transform our people. Your Excellencies, this next chapter of the Europe-Africa story is what we together are writing from today. And it can be a story of mutual renewal, where Europe recognizes that Africa's strength is not its burden, but its opportunity, where both continents rise together in dignity, in peace, and in shared prosperity. Let us not look away from the hard truths of our history, but let us also not look away from the extraordinary promise that lies ahead. Thank you for listening. Muito obrigado. Thank you.